Hi, it's Kirby Sommers. Today is September 4th, 2025, and I'm going to be addressing the male victims who were not present at the conference held by many of Jeffrey Epstein victims yesterday on September the 3rd. I think few people are aware that are, in fact, male victims and trans women. Okay. These are not necessarily discussed in the media. I do keep an eye on all of the unusual, rather unshared information about this case. And so today I wanted to address, well, where are the boys? Literally the boys. So I'm going to share with you at least two of these cases that the media really doesn't address. And when it did address them, at least in one case, the victim was incredibly mocked, and we'll get into that. So, we know that a group of Jeffrey Epstein's victims did hold a press conference yesterday on September the 3rd in Washington, D.C., where they shared their stories of abuse and called for the release of all files related to the Epstein case. So, like, they emphasized the need for transparency and accountability, basically urging lawmakers to support their efforts to compel the Justice Department to disclose withheld documents. But so here's the thing. Back in 2021, there was a lawsuit from a man who claimed that Epstein, after hiring him from high school in 2013, at the age of, he was less than 17, he said, that he used him in an S performance. Now, I recall that case very well. Frankly, it's still pending, although it is my understanding that this victim's attorney attempted to reach a settlement with the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, and it does not appear that that person was accepted. Some people were excluded. I think I have shared that David Boies had a big hand in deciding who got funds. He, in fact, had a hand in writing the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. However, let's just return to this. So he basically just used the initials MH, and according to the complaint, he is a resident of Queens. He was hired as a financial services intern between the summer of 2013 and the spring of 2014. I want to pause here and ask you, we're on a platform, it's for patrons only. And while I have hundreds of people here, maybe 5 or 6 of you take the time to like the podcast. Do me a favor, like it, because even on this platform, there is sort of like it depends. People will actually listen to something that has a lot of likes. So this work is very draining, as many of you probably know, because I too am a survivor. And so the fact that I have been working on this diligently and beginning the 7th year, it is not easy for me to do this. So just liking this helps the algorithm. So if you don't mind, give it a like while you're listening to it now. So again, he was hired as a financial services intern between the summer of 2013 and the spring of 2014. Now, he does claim that he was abused, right? That he, as a result, was injured, that he will continue to suffer great mental pain and is incapacitated from his usual daily pursuits, which happened. Now, the way that I remember it, he was made to perform on an Arab friend of JE's. I know the name of that person. The thing here is that this particular male, who was also a victim of JE, and again, the males are not discussed and they don't really step forward. It's very difficult for men to step forward. However, he too is Arab, and it is as shameful as it is for men to step forward of any ethnicity or religious things, it seems to be particularly painful for somebody who is Arab. It's he probably would have been ashamed out of his being in the family. So he did not really want to make a big deal about it. I remember getting a lot of people coming to me back in the day before Elon Musk erased my Twitter account, my main Twitter account, made it just vanish, disappear, where I used to keep tons of notes and threads about almost everything under the sun, and other researchers would use it as their research tool, asking me about this particular young man. However, the case continues to be open. Therefore, there has been no settlement, and no one really ever hears about the men. Now, there is another one that I have written about in the past, and it is, and I'm just going to pull up the, okay, so this is a trans woman who was perhaps one of the first victims to step forward and sue Jeffrey Epstein, but also sued Leslie Wexner. So I am going to just briefly put that on, and I'll return to Ava and what happened with Ava in a little bit. So I wrote an article at the time many years ago, and I'm going to read most of it to you. Obviously, I'm going to probably have to blur some of the wording because it's very graphic. It is very graphic. The way I was able to reconstruct this was I took the lawsuit and I reconstructed what happened, turned it into something that you could read and understand. So many people are unaware that Epstein cross-dressed. Probably you're never going to hear that from anybody else. But I look at all the nooks and crannies of this case, as most of you know. I'm going to just start reading my thing now. Jeffrey Epstein stepped out of the bathroom wearing a matted red wig and matching red lipstick across his lips. Call me Janice. He had his own name for what he wanted to be called while he was dressing as a woman. So Maximilio Cordero was born on November 15, 1983. Ever since he could remember, he strongly identified as a girl. At 12, she began to dress like a girl and began to live as a female. She had cosmetic work and hormone treatments to help her look more like a woman. She even learned how to apply makeup perfectly. The reflection in the mirror was stunning. Ava was far more beautiful than many of the other girls she'd seen on magazine covers. So at this time, I'm just going to go ahead and put her image on the screen because looking at her, she indeed is very beautiful. And however, at the time when she stepped forward, clearly the media was still very much against anyone who stepped forward as a victim, whether you were a girl or woman, a minor or an adult. What she wanted the most was the real thing, to have a sex change operation. However, for that, she would need $10,000. And so she began to save money in order to have the procedure. In the spring of 2000, while attending the Fashion Institute of Technology on a part-time basis, she was approached by a woman in her 40s. Her new acquaintance confided that she had a super wealthy male friend who could help her develop a modeling career. He has a thing for massages and pays well. You should meet him, the older woman urged. She then handed Ava a slip of paper where she scrawled Epstein's address. You know, the one on, I'm just taking a break from the reading and saying the mansion that he had on 71st Street. So that's the address she was given. So Ava agreed. After all, it seemed like the chance of a lifetime, a way to make all her dreams come true. Ava Cordero stood in front of the majestic 51 square foot mansion on East 71st Street with the oversized 16-foot oak doors and rang the bell. She could hardly believe it. The whole thing seemed like a fairy tale. Clad only in a bathrobe and slippers, Epstein, 47, greeted her. He had grayish hair and a thick Brooklyn accent. The house was awe-inspiring with designer furnishings and giant sculptures. Ava had never seen anything like it. Epstein took her on a tour of his palatial home. When they stopped at his office, he pointed to the taxidermied poodle and then to the small replica. And this is legit a real thing of dog feces. There is another story to this, but I'm not going to get into it now because I'm going to go back to reading the Ava story to you. So Ava giggled and he let out a hee haw laugh. Now, back in the day when he was in high school, he always had a hee haw laugh. He laughed in a very unusual way. And his friends, I'm just reading off script now, I'm just reading from memory, in Brooklyn remembered that whenever he laughed, and he was a very awkward teenager, he was overweight, his hair was very unruly, he had a very, very thick accent. And when he laughed, he just had a very unusual laugh. But anyway, he let out a hee haw laugh. It was like he was a kid all over again. He always got a rise out of shocking people. The gray haired man then bragged to the 16-year-old that he was the money manager for billionaire Leslie Wexner. And I'm going to go back and get these guys back up on the screen. Okay, there we go. Leslie Wexner. My friend Les Wexner owns Victoria's Secret, and I can get him to let you be one of the models in his catalog. He paused and waited for the desired effect. The gleam of hope reflected in all his victims' eyes. Then he added the caveat, that is, if you're nice to me. I'm 16 years old, she replied. All I want to do is become a model. She was becoming increasingly uneasy. Epstein slipped out of the robe. He was naked. Before Ava knew what was happening or what to do, he grabbed her head and forcibly pushed her down and demanded, you know what? Okay, I don't have to say it. Be nice to me, he repeated again, while, you know, being aggressive in that way. I can't go into the details. However, this is a chapter in my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy. And then he said to her, you know what you have to do. And then he said, if you want me to help you, again, I have these exact words from the lawsuit. So this is exactly what happened, which I recreated in this chapter that I include in my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy. If you want me to help you, then you have to help me. His words were like daggers. He sounded like a mobster and not at all like the billionaire she was told she'd meet. Once he got her to comply, he grabbed her, let's call it member, very hard. She screamed. He then softened his touch and then began to do things to it. Okay, just use your imagination. When it was over, after she had been R worded, as she was trying to pull herself together, she heard him say breezily, come back sometime. Bring your 14, 15, and 16-year-old girlfriends. I love girls your age. Now, what he meant by that was that if she knew other trans girls to bring them to him. That's what he meant by that. He acted as if nothing had happened, even though her entire life had just been shattered. After the shock was over, she fell into a pattern of seeing him. What else could she lose? At one point, Epstein felt so comfortable with her that he invited her to accompany him to Thailand. Now, that's an interesting thing, and the timeline is very interesting because it coincides with the time that Prince Andrew was also visiting Thailand on a regular basis. And then he said to her, while they were going to Thailand, that she could help him pick up other girls her age. Um, so, like, this is really a fascinating account of Epstein and drag, which is again rarely discussed. And what I want to say about this is that And I'm just going to put the picture back up. The New York Post was owned by Mort Zuckerman, a one-time business partner of Epstein's. And actually, the New York Post was owned by Rupert Murdoch. However, among the newspapers that mocked Eva Cordero were both the Daily News, then owned by Mort Zuckerman, and the New York Post, again owned by Rupert Murdoch, a friend of both Wexner and Epstein. Epstein. Epstein Extreme. I think we could just substitute that and that'll be fine. Mainstream media labeled Cordero, who's basically the victim, an extortionist because the law she filed a lawsuit. And what the thing was is that she filed a lawsuit against both Wexner and Epstein because at the time, the legal owner of the property on 71st Street was Wexner. And in New York, there is a law that, and it's under real property law of New York, that owners have a responsibility when somebody gets injured on their property. So this extends to anyone who's a guest. And then it does place the onus on, quote, the landlord to keep them free from preventable harm. Now, again, Ava was the first person to bring a lawsuit against Epstein. However, and frankly, Ava was also among the people that Virginia Giuffre listed as somebody who could verify her story. Now, it wasn't until 2011 that Wexner transferred the deed to the 71st Street property to Epstein, who then had an address in the Virgin Islands. However, in 2017, after the lawsuit, after Eva Cordero was mocked by the media, she was arrested. Now, the way she was arrested, I'm going to describe it to you. And in 2017, remember, Leslie Wexner had come out many years earlier, and also in 2019, when Epstein was arrested, clutching his pearls, saying that he had nothing to do with Epstein for many, many years. However, Eva Cordero was arrested in a Victoria's Secret store on March 1st, 2017, and was arrested on the charge that she was, quote, stealing lingerie. Now, in New York, the threshold for theft to be considered grand larceny is $1,000. At least it was at the time in 2017 when she was arrested. So that they arrested her for, quote, stealing $1,000 flat. So it fell under grand larceny, which enabled the police to arrest Ava. Not like $900, not $999, but a flat $1,000. So they sent her to jail. So here's the thing. If you out someone who's very powerful, something bad is going to happen to you. I know this from firsthand experience. I am still attacked on a regular basis. I have experienced all kinds of horrible things. I have had 3 attempts on my life. Terrible things happen to me. So therefore, I have to be super, super careful. Ava Cordero, to look back to the premise of this podcast, again, Patron-only Podcast, none of the men who now would be men, whether they're trans or not, straight, showed up at the conference. And even the women who did show up, everybody is showing their support, but are they going to be able to name names as they claimed while they were on stage? No, not really, because they're going to be sued if they do that. And they could have done it, frankly, while they were standing on the podium. They could have just stood up and named names. And I knew a lot of the names with each of the victims that stepped forward, except for a few, like, some of them, like Annie Farmer, had never been R-worded, let's just say. However, then it was sort of clarified. They're not going to quote name names unless they um, can have justice be done. And justice can only be done via the government. So do you think, and I'd love to hear your commentary. So Leslie Wexner appears to have been involved in having Ava Cordero arrested in 2017 as retribution for having the audacity to bring him to court, right? For having the audacity. Mainstream media will not discuss this, has not discussed this. I'm the only one that has, frankly, as far as what happened to Ava after she went public. Do you really think that the government is going to go after somebody like Leslie Wexner with very deep pockets at this point, who has helped the government with, let's say, covert activities and or other men of substance? From where I sit, I don't think that's a possibility. So will these women actually step forward and out their abusers? I think not, but I'd love to hear your commentary. And also, uh, are you surprised that there are men who were victims of Epstein and that he did actually have a preference every now and then for something a little spicier, and I hate to put it that way, than 14-year-old girls or even adult women? With that, I'm going to wish you a good day, and until next time. Bye.